the impact of being an educator, of being a teacher, that you control your space when you are standing in front of those young people and you can guide them into success or you can guide them into darkness. It's a choice.
Welcome to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast, the space where education meets resilience. I'm Dr. Joey Weisler, and in each episode, we dive deep into the personal stories of educators, students, leaders, and frontline advocates who are navigating the complexities within modern education. Whether you're just starting your teaching journey or are a seasoned professional looking for inspiration, we'll explore how to foster meaningful change, prevent burnout, and build trauma-informed communities within our schools. Now, let's take a seat at the front of the classroom as we get started. I'm so excited to have Dr. Kofi Rogers as my guest for today. And Dr. Rogers is an award-winning equity leader, educator, and speaker with over 3 decades of experience in public education, raised in Brooklyn, New York, and now serving as a district director in California. Dr. Rogers brings lived experience and professional expertise to every page. His work centers on transforming educational spaces for marginalized students, particularly Black youth, and as a 2025 ACSA, or Association of California School Administrators, Administrator of the Year and President-elect of ACSA Region 7, his insights are both personal and deeply rooted in leadership practice. He's also the author of the memoir, Change the Narrative, Don't Let the Narrative Change You, and that is a wonderful text that brought this conversation here today. Dr. Rogers, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the introduction. It just warmed my heart to be here, so thank you for having me.
Thank you for sharing your story. And when I read Change the Narrative, it was such a moving text. And rarely do I say that I'm moved by a text that is more academic in nature as well. But your text was extremely moving to me in terms of just understanding the roles that we have in education, who we teach, what we teach, why we teach, and who we are while we do that. Because identity at all levels of the system is pretty fundamental in helping us through the work that we do on a daily basis. So I wanted to start by reading a quote from your book. It's on page 10. You say, "What kind of future could we imagine when society has already written the end of our stories before we had even begun? I used to feel like every misstep, no matter how small, brought me 1 inch closer to becoming a statistic. Every time I heard that number repeated, it chipped away at the fragile hope that I was trying to hold on to. It haunted me, not because I believed it would come true, but because the world around me seems to already believe it already had." And you're writing this and speaking of Black youth in education as well. So I want to start by asking, in Change the Narrative Before It Changes You, what does that title mean? Change the narrative before it changes you. And what makes some young boys and girls internalize society's narratives?
Great question. Thank you very much for asking. I'll start with this. You know how you have that self-fulfilling prophecies when you speak something into existence? Well, that can be positive and or negative. And so if the world around you sees you as something and they continually provide you with that input, and your brain is a piece of your body that takes on information and it starts to shape thought. You know, Bruce Lee used to say that everything that you think of, you become. So your thoughts are powerful. So when people talk to you and people give you that information, you have to go through and you have to dissect it. Do I take this on? Do I believe what they say? Or do I reject it because I have that self-confidence in myself? But we're talking about children. Children are very impressionable. We're talking about children who are waiting for adults to give them information and they feed off of that information. And the hope is that adults are feeding young people information which can inspire them, lift them up, elevate them, and give them hope. But when the narrative on with society is that you're not good, you're not good enough, you know, you're not strong, all of these negative words, then that begins to chip away at person's psyche. Like how much of a diet, mental diet, can you withstand before you become that? If you tell a child you're beautiful, you're kind, you're loving, there is research that shows that facial expressions and the body takes on those words and you become that in the same way that you say these negative things and then you sway and you start to battle with that. So what change the narrative is gives us an opportunity to say, hey, what does society say about Black students? What does society say about Black people? But when you look at the statistics, when I put in the front of the book, we're looking at how many people are incarcerated. And is that a number that we feed into? Because they say, oh, you're more than likely to go to jail or prison rather than go to college? Or do we say, you know what, that's not going to be me, regardless of what people say about me? When you walk down the street as a Black man and someone wants to clutch their purse even tighter because they don't know if you want to rob them or not. Because again, these narratives, when you look at TV or movies or books, it becomes that narrative of, do I fit the mold in which society is putting on me? We can even go back into school systems. Are you aware of when history is taught to students? It's about eighth grade, right? So about seventh, eighth grade, they get introduced to history. The first
Yes.
time that Black people are introduced to students through history, it
Mhm.
starts with slavery. So to give students, people who may not be familiar with people of color, Black people,
Yeah.
and you start off with slavery or enslavement, it changes the narrative of what someone may believe about someone. It gives them a starting point. When there's a clean slate and no knowledge or no information, and now all of a sudden you're talking about enslaved people to people who don't know Black folks. So they automatically start relating that imagery to Black people. So with schools, I often challenge, why do we start there? There is a whole history prior to enslavement. And but we in this country oftentimes start there, which is so unfair to Black students, especially when you go to suburban schools where there's a small population of Black students in that classroom. So now that student has to take on all of the imagery and all of the feelings and beliefs, whatever, that now that educator has put into that space. And it becomes hard and challenging. So changing the narrative is always being able to stand up and be different than what the mainstream narratives say about us. You know, the stereotypes, the negative inferences, all of these things that impact our daily lives, the racial profiling, all of these things. And again, another interesting thing is the worldview is that when you leave this country and you go to other countries, it's not the same thing because now we're American. So it's not that we're Black, we're American. So it changes that narrative. And it's interesting. And when you go to African countries, it's even different because you're no longer the minority. You're the majority in most African countries. And that changes that narrative. So I often think of myself as a child, not really knowing the landscape of our country or the landscape of the world yet, and asking myself, why did people speak to me in the way they spoke to me? You know, why did people who didn't live in my neighborhood treat me as if I was unkind or treat me as if I was a bad person without even knowing me? So going into education, it was just, again, supported by teachers who didn't believe in me, teachers who didn't pour into me, but I saw them pour into other people. And it wasn't just my experience, it was the experience of my friends. It was the experience of my outer community. It was the experience of the research that I read that many of us felt the same way. And we still deal with that to this day, that oftentimes there is that gap.
I love all that you shared, and especially I think about Adichie Ngozi's TED Talk, "The Danger of a Single Story," where she says
Yes,
that,
I love that story. I love that one.
yes,
That was a
I
great one.
just showed it yesterday when talking about the help in my literature class. And she says that the danger comes when a single story becomes the definitive narrative of a group of
Absolutely.
people. So, like you
Absolutely.
said, when the entry point in history is about slavery, that now becomes a definitive perspective, right? So one of
Absolutely.
the ways that we need to do is to overturn the narrative by also showing a full range of perspectives as to what people are and what they're all about. And I want to read another quote real quick as well on that same topic. This is a quote from your mother on page 11. You
Okay.
say, "My mother had a saying that stuck with me through the years. She said, 'Don't let people use you as a coat rack.' You say, 'I
Yes.
didn't understand that at first, but over time it made perfect sense. Don't let people hang things on you that don't belong to you. Your
Right.
burdens, your assumptions, your projections.'" And you say that quote was her armor. Now it is mine. So, my second question, to continue on what you've already shared, is that you have your
Mhm.
text that's constructed as an ode to take self-control by overturning those societal narratives. And while your audience is also tailored towards students, I'm thinking about what it also means for teachers who may be working to redefine certain statistics, like when you say that self-fulfilling prophecy. In my first year teaching, I was told by my principal, he said to me on more than one occasion, he said, I think you're a good teacher. You can be great. The way I internalized that was that, well, I'm just mediocre.
Right.
That is who I am. And there's also that same language about teachers going around at that time, 2019, that we were just babysitters. I was told by many colleagues who meant all the best intentions, but they were right. I was told by colleagues with all the best intentions that I would not make it beyond year 3 to 5. I lasted 1 year, so they were very correct. But yet, that's our statistic. I became that statistic, and that became my story. That teachers don't even exist in the system beyond 3 to 5 years. So, when it comes to overturning the narrative, let's flip the script for a moment to talk about the teachers and how can they also work to undo the narratives that society sees as our single story.
First, again, thank you for sharing that part about you because, yes, that single story. And also, it talks about leadership, when
Mhm.
leadership doesn't speak greatness into you. And if they are not speaking greatness into you as an adult and as a professional, you could just imagine what they're doing to our babies. Again, it's about building relationships, like you said earlier, talking about that single story. The single story is as a result of people not seeking to understand. Socrates talks about know thyself, right? So
Mhm.
you know who you are. But who are you? You are made up of your experiences. So when you shape your experiences to become greater, then you become greater. If you have just a single story that you provide to people, then that makes you very narrow-minded when you walk into a situation because you're not open up to seeing the possibilities of so many things in this country. Our country, proud country, love to be a part of the country, and everything's great. But within our country, we have a melting pot of different people, and we have all of these different folks who come from all different walks of life, and everyone thinks that their culture is the best. you know, but when you go to another country, you're only dealing with a monolithic group. You're dealing with one culture, one mindset, and that's it. That drives that country. And it's dangerous when you can't see outside of yourself to think that someone else or someone else's culture can contribute to your life. The thing with, you said about having what can help shape the teachers or educators, building bridges to learn, to have discussions. In my book, part of it is a toolkit to kind of help people tie in conversations because sometimes you don't know how to have those conversations and everyone is not skilled at it. Everyone is not skilled at breaking down walls to have those courageous and those beautiful conversations that go deep beyond the surface. So in the book, when I talk about my stories, I ask the educator to pause and give the students an opportunity to talk about their experiences that relate to the story they just read. One, it builds on comprehension. Did you understand what you just read? Two, it builds on critical thinking. Now take what you just read and apply it to your own life. Ask yourself, what stories or what similar stories can you express to the adult that's working with you about who you are? And from there, the dialogue can begin to have layers taken away where there can be some true samples of who that person is right in front of you versus the narrative that people have painted for that student.
That actually brings me to a very natural transition when you talk about some of your own personal narratives as well. And I'm going to read another quote from page 98. Being a darker skinned black male with full lips, facial hair, and the speech impediment caused me so much pain. I was safe in my neighborhood as there were reflections of me all around and I was the norm. However, my mother decided to send me to a school outside of our neighborhood, guessing I needed to be in a different environment. This is where things became confusing. Sending me to a predominantly white neighborhood school in Sheepshead Bay was the beginning of my DEI journey without me even knowing it. There I felt out of place, invisible, and empty. And in this school environment, I didn't see myself in my new peers. I didn't see myself in the stores, and I didn't see myself in the classroom. I was never an outgoing, scholarly, motivated student, and this only caused me to go into my shell even further. Only in my neighborhood did I feel safe and free from denigration. Being in a suburban school was incredibly difficult to navigate. On the surface, everything looked picture perfect, well funded campuses, smiling teachers, clean hallways. But for a young Black boy like me, the experience was layered in isolation, microaggressions, and identity confusion. My self-esteem took blow after blow to the point where I often battled feelings of depression. So thank you for sharing that deeply personal narrative within your text. And what I want to ask is, how did your childhood upbringing in schools really shape your trajectory towards DEI? And what was school like for you in terms of what you mentioned for you and your peers a little bit earlier in this conversation? What did go well? What did not go well? And how did that inspire both the work that you do and the expectation that you now have for other educators doing work like you?
Well, thank you for sharing that. Every time I hear it, it takes me back to that same point. But simply put, it taught me I did not want another student to feel like I did, to be so demoralized, to be so hopeless and feel helpless. I didn't want another student to feel like that, no matter who that student was, because I felt like I didn't have the parents at home who understood my emotions that deep. They loved me. I had my mother and my father at home. They loved me very deeply, but I thought that they just didn't really truly understand how sending me to a suburban school outside of our neighborhood impacted me. So for me, that DEI journey started to happen because those experiences that hurt me very profoundly, but also being resilient, I was able to bounce back from those things. And it wasn't just by happenstance. I had people who continued to pick me up and to love on me and to provide me with reassurances. And that gave me the hope to keep going. Now, I look at other students who don't have a dual parent home. I look at other students who don't have a loving home or a healthy home life to go back to. And the question I ask myself is, who helps them? Who gives them the ability to just come home and let all of that stuff go and restore your confidence and your faith and the strength you have to go back out there into the world? And if you don't have that, then how much of that can you take every day? That going back to that chipping away, being someone who faces someone looking at you funny, saying something to you discriminatory. And you have to remember, we're talking about back in the 80s that I was in school, where being dark skinned was not popular, having full lips was not popular. And I've had facial hair since I was 14. I was an anomaly, right? And I didn't know the beauty I possessed because no one really spoke it into me outside of my parents. They would tell me that I'm beautiful and they would tell me that I'm loved. They would tell me that all the time. However, I expected my parents to do it, right? But they're just that internal piece that gave me that. But I wanted the world to accept me. And I wasn't aware at the time that I didn't need the world's acceptance. I had all the acceptance I needed right there at home. And so as a child, I struggled because I looked for affirmations outside of the place that centered me. Home was all I needed, but I wanted more. I wanted to be loved or cared for or even just respected when I walked outside. I didn't want to get called dark skinned. I remember there was a point in time where I tried to scrub the black off of my face with sandpaper because I no longer wanted to be dark skinned. And being able to go home and cry and recognize that I had parents who would come and just wrap their arms around me and just love on me gave me hope to go out and try it again. And sometimes I failed because I fought and I got in trouble, or sometimes I was successful because I stood up for myself and no one said anything. But it wasn't until I became an adult, until I came into the realization of the beauty I possessed and who I was versus who I was not. The goal for me is to, it still is to educate educators on the impact of their words, the impact of their being complicit when they hear these things going on. When students are really demoralizing other students in front of them, but they don't speak up, the impact of their power of being an educator, of being a teacher, that you control your space when you are standing in front of those young people and you can guide them into success or you can guide them in the darkness. It's a choice. And for the students, giving them an opportunity to understand that, yes, there are going to be some bad things that may be said or may happen, but to find some loved ones, to find your village, if you will, that will lift you up and keep you company, because it may not always be your family, but your village, whoever you choose your village to be. And that's why in the book, I also talked about show me who your five friends are, and I can tell you about yourself. If you show me who your village is, I can tell what you're like and what you may not be like. But it's up to you as an individual to continue to find people who can add to your life, add value.
This is such a natural conversation. Thank you so much because some things have grabbed my attention as well as that's true. What are we doing for the students and how do we serve them, especially when love may not be present outside of the
Mhm,
classroom for them? How can that classroom really be shaped into that place of love? And I know in my
mhm,
classrooms, what I really try and do is advocate for students' successes while
mhm.
also trying to build and support the flaws and weaknesses that they carry, whether it's emotional or
Absolutely.
academic. And my number one thing to do, even though I just did it on a bunch of student essays 2 nights ago, is to avoid punishing students where they're missing content or in weak areas of development. I really try to avoid punitive approaches, but rather supportive
Right.
approaches. I guess I was supportive because I said to them, hey, if you're not happy with their score, tell me about it and we'll give you a redo. And that brings me to a next part of the conversation, which, as you mentioned, is about villages. So you speak about many individuals, now to turn towards resilience, right? You speak about many individuals who have shown humanity and have lifted you up on your journey. And once you became a school administrator, what did leadership look like for you? And how did you continue to portray that humanity? And you also talked about some programs as well that you've
Mhm.
implemented. And what do those villages and bridges even look like for you in leadership?
I was fortunate and very blessed to have so many people around me that continue to just pour into me. I'll start with professionally. I earned my PPS credential in school counseling and school administration. Started working at a Upland High School in Southern California, and there I ran into some incredible, incredible leaders, and I'm going to give them their respect. Guy Ruby was a principal. He was short in stature, but tall as the tallest building in Chicago. He was just an amazing man. Dave Mooney, a very spiritually guided man who had a heart of gold. Those two individuals in particular, there was a couple more, but those two people in particular really shaped me as far as the leadership is concerned. When I had some personal problems going on, or just didn't feel like being a professional that day, they didn't chastise me, they didn't beat me down, they didn't do any of those things. They lifted me up with everything, encouraged me, and supported me. When life just took its toll on me at times, with every where I had my own situations, and I mentioned in the book how
Yes.
I had gone through a situation at the school where, back in the day, you had to take your CVEST and you had to have all your credential stuff before you started the job. But in this particular case, up and hired me without all of the paperwork, whatever, being done. And so they let me work the whole month and a half. And then when it came time for me to get my paycheck, they told me that I didn't have all of my paperwork in and I wasn't going to get a check. So I look at that situation now and say, I would have definitely handled that situation a lot differently because I know differently now.
Right.
But back then, I was a new certificated leader, and I believed in that school so much that I just went along with whatever they told me. And so I was removed from my position, but financially, that completely interrupted my life. And those people came to me and in my time of need, in my darkest hour, and supported me and lifted me up and told me, hey, whatever you need to get the credentialing information completed, we'll have your job for you when you're done. Just hurry up and get it done. They didn't have to do that. They could have said, hey, you know what? You don't have your paperwork in place. You don't have your CBS completed. Oh, well, too bad. So sad. Take care. And that could have been it. That would have been the end of the story. But that wasn't the end of the story. So when I passed the test, I came back. And that was about 4 months later. And who does that, right?
Yeah.
Who does that? They had a substitute in my chair holding it down until I came back. And when I came back, they almost like threw me a party coming back. They had to go through the routine of interviewing me again and all of those things, but I was allowed for the position. And even with financial support, the assistant principal, Dave Mooney, he and his wife gave me and my kids some money to kind of help me fill in some gaps or whatever, until I can figure some things out. Can't tell you how invaluable that act of service was because I had no idea what I was going to do. I had counted up all of the money I was going to get for my paycheck. And then when I didn't get that paycheck, everything just fell apart. It was like a house of cards. It just collapsed. And to know that their heart was genuine and the only thing that they asked for was for me to just not stress out and to just come back. And what could I ask for from that? So yes, so when I came back, there was nothing I would not do for those people. Whatever they wanted me to do, whatever they asked of me to do, I did it fearlessly, courageously, because those were leaders I followed without question.
Love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I also think about when it comes to bridges, what advice would you have for teachers that feel as if they can't sustain a lifelong village? Like you, I think you also mentioned like the idea of the classroom family, right? In the classroom village, where
Mhm.
as educators, they form a village every year with their students. And I know that it's quite true what we read on social media that we form these little families and villages for 9 months,
Mhm.
and then sayonara, off they go into the wild world that we have. And I know that as a first year teacher, like I cannot even tell you, I feel like one of my darkest hours after the tragedy was when I did leave my first group of students. Part and because they were my first class, like you never forget the first class you ever teach. But second, because like I just knew that the partnership that we built in that classroom would be unsustained
Mhm.
after I was not there. That's just
Right.
natural, right? What advice do you have for teachers, especially starting teachers, when they feel as if they really are not able to sustain that lifelong village? Like for teachers that really come in for those lifelong partnerships. You said you still see students now that are adults that you knew when they were younger. For those teachers that really wanted to see students evolve, but don't have that same opportunity for whatever circumstances might be, what advice did you have for them in terms of like their own internalization from never hearing from students again?
Well, to give themselves grace because it's not always going to happen. I didn't predict that it was going to happen that way.
Sure.
And I didn't strive out to, oh, well, I want these kids to like me. That was just a natural thing. And the thing I can suggest is to just meet them where they are. If you know that students have clubs on campus, go to some of the clubs that interest you because the more you have in common with students, and the more you can assist them with the things that they do in their normal day-to-day life, that builds those bridges and those connections. I was the staff advisor for the BSU, the Black Student Union on campus. There were ASB, meetings and classes. And when the regular advisor couldn't go, I'd step in. We had different mentorship groups on campus and we had field trips. I'm volunteering to go. I was also a football coach. So I was a conditioning coach and I'm out there, I'm working out with them. They're cheering me on, I'm cheering them on, and we are just tied into each other. So when they see me on the campus, it's like, hey, coach, hey, Mr. Rogers. It's always one of those things that the more time you spend with them, the more familiar you are with them. And they're all looking for somebody to connect with. So if you find them where they are, and you connect with them, that gives you an opportunity to build that. Now, will it always turn out the way you think as far as lifelong partnerships? No, that's not predicted. That just comes naturally. When you meet with their families, when you talk to their parents or grandparents or whoever, they're the people who take care of them. When they come in, ask yourself, what's your relationship with them? I knew their family so deeply because we would have these human conversations, not politics of, oh, your kid messed up and all of these things. No, it was more of, hey, this is what I'm noticing. And this is what I'm talking to your kid about. This is what may help. And just that continuing conversation and that continuing engagement builds those relationships with those adults. And those adults trust you now. And that's the huge thing because when mistakes happen, and mistakes are going to happen, there's going to be something that's going to happen. But when they do happen, those parents believe in you because you built that trust, you built that rapport with them, and they know that you have best intentions with their children. And as a result of that, whatever advice you give them, they are more than likely to say, okay, we understand. If you educate them on the education code, if you give them guidance that says, well, this is why I'm making the ruling or determination that I'm making, and if you can find some way of shedding some humanistic qualities in that, in your tone, the way you deliver it, just pausing and allow them to speak so they can be heard and validating their feelings. That's a beautiful relationship that takes place. And it's no longer just about educator and student or educator and parent. it becomes a journey that you're taking on. You're giving that parent and that family an A1 educational experience, and you're changing them for the rest of their lives.
I love that, especially the idea of being present, meeting students where
Being
they are
present,
and being present as a way
right?
to hold their intentions through your partnership with them. And I love that you mentioned your philosophies because you also mentioned that when you were starting to become a principal, a lot of your accomplishments were perceived as threats. And I recently had a conversation with Dr. Robert Hinchcliffe. Do you know Principal Hinchcliffe?
I've heard of him. Have not met him.
Well, we will definitely have to make an introduction between the two of you. And I also met him through Jeremy as well. I met him because Jeremy contributed to his anthology more than
Right.
just a principal. So if you
Yes,
don't,
I remember that.
yes. So if you haven't spoken with him yet, I would love to bridge that introduction for you both, for
Sounds
certain.
good. Thank you.
And with Principal Hinchcliffe, he talks about the certain decisions that leaders make at all levels that help them become more than just the principal. Yet at the same time, sometimes they make decisions where some of the staff will be very happy, others will be very upset, and some will not want to take certain criticism or direction at face value. One quote that you write in your book is that something that you never learned in principal school is that leadership is lonely. Justice is costly, and change is met with resistance. So, I want to hear more about what that means for those of us in education, including teachers and leaders. And what were
Okay.
some harder lessons that you've learned just by being part of the job? You've spoken about some moments of resilience with the job. And what about some moments that were challenging and helped you grow as well?
Okay, great. I think that's a nice point. Well, when you're a principal, you are the leader, the administrator that governs the school, and you don't have anyone as a peer on your level to
Mhm.
confide in and to talk to. Everyone else, as far who are principals, they're at other schools. So here you are, you have direct reports now,
Mhm.
and you have people who respond to you or look to you as a leader and not as a peer. So when you walk into the cafeteria, the teachers' lounge, it's all the laughing and the giggling and all of this stuff going on. But then
It
when you
just
walk in, it's the
stops. Yep.
you know, and it's just one of those things where you can overcome that in time, but you have to build that trust with your staff members who are there on the campus. But coming on, you have to build those relationships and you have to begin to go into and meet those staff members where they are so you can have those things. But ultimately, you are the leader of the school, and some decisions that you make may not be in favor of some folks. Case in point, when I was a principal, I saw that there were statistically some areas that needed to have some growth. We would have a small number of Black students on our campus, but they were the largest number of students receiving referrals. And no one seemed to question that narrative. Like, hey, how is it that we have the smallest number of the smallest demographic of students on the campus receiving the most referrals and the most suspensions? Like, please explain that because that's a microcosm of our country, of who's in prison in our country. And so the question came up and no one wanted to speak to it. And so me being, again, a leader, we have to have this conversation because make it make sense. So when you go into an office and you see nothing but Black kids on the bench waiting for you, and you have all white teachers that are in your classrooms, is no one going to even raise an eyebrow to ask the question, is there something else there? Maybe it's not. However, it still deserves some investigation and just some curiosity and just some layers to be pulled back. So we had that conversation and we talked about, well, let's interview these kids and ask questions to see what commonalities they have, see what they're doing in the classroom, and seeing exactly what time is happening and all of those wonderful layers that you go into when you look at qualitative studies. And come to find out, all of these students had one thing in common. They didn't have fathers at home. All of these students were being sent out for defiance. All of these students were sent out from teachers who never had a problem when other groups of students were having defiant issues. They were able to talk to them. But with these kids, they were seen as troubled. They were seen as disruptive. They were seen as all of the things that society tells that Black boys are. So one of the suggestions was, hey, let's sit down and brainstorm some ideas so we can keep these kids in class. so we can keep these kids from being suspended, so we can help speak life into these kids and they can want to be on campus. And so throughout our session, some different ideas came up. And one of the ideas was like, well, let's have an after school program for these kids and give them an opportunity to build and have an affinity group. And on the campus, this particular campus, they had an LGBTQ group on campus, which no one seemed to have a problem with, but everyone seemed to support and everyone seemed to just love. And so with this other group, with the Black students, we said, well, we're going to give them, group. So we can call it something like From Boys to Kings, where they're, again, uplifting, give them something to believe in, that they're not the negative stereotypes that people call them. We're going to give them royalty. And immediately it was met with, we don't like that name. We don't want them to be, why are we calling them kings? I said, because if we are speaking life into these young people, we're going to change a narrative for them so they can start seeing themselves as regal, royalty, and all of those things that come with power and governance, and all of these things that a king would have. And they fought tooth and nail not to have that group take place. That was met with a lot of resistance from a veteran staff that was there. And it was just something that, again, they could not see past. So I had to incorporate and bring along some professional development that wasn't me to speak to it so they can kind of understand. And it was money well spent. There wasn't a lot of change that happened, to be honest, but I felt like there were seeds planted. And long after I was gone, well, here we are, talking about DEI. So talking about the importance of doing this work. So I feel like I was the first one to introduce it to them because they had never seen or never had a Black administrator in their midst before. So introducing it to them and exposing them to them and having those conversations was something that was planting the seeds of things that was to come. And not really having anybody to talk to about it on campus was hard. But on the flip side, they have community on the campus. They have unions that back them and support them. They have all of these things that help them strategize how they can combat whatever is going on versus me. I have to brainstorm within my head and then take it elsewhere and hope that I can get the same type of support. So yeah, so my mother taught me also that the higher you climb, the more you have to serve.
Yes,
And
yes.
and knowing that I wouldn't give up or get frustrated, but it was just, okay, how do we fix this and how do we remedy this?
Totally agreed. And one of the mantras that I designed on my own is that leadership is a liability. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that all that you've done to just really inspire the communities you've been a part of has been such a gift to each of them. So thank you for all that you've done with them.
It's a servitude of love. And yes, it does hurt sometimes because to know what you feel is good for kids is going to be met with resistance
Yes.
so much that you see people digging their heels. And I saw some stuff. I saw women crying, you know, and and just losing it because they did not want to change the way they were doing things. And to know that you have to combat that was difficult. In the Black community, one of the things that we talk about is not being able to fold under pressure because we carry the weight of so many that's in back of us. And if I fold, then are they going to allow another Black man to come behind me? So let me stand up strong and let me do this right because I want to keep that door open for the possibilities of somebody coming who looks like me to come after me.
Thank you for that. And as we start to come towards the end of our conversation, are there any points that we haven't touched on yet that was still something that you wanted to share with our listeners? And at the same time, what's coming up next for you?
Oh my God. Okay. So, first of all, I want to say thank you very much for this opportunity and thank you for this time. I feel like this is an opportunity to have candid conversation that's not often given, that's not often having the opportunity to provide. One, I want to plug in, the education talk show with Jeremy Brooks because we are on that show, we model that diversity. We model what it looks like for different people with different experiences to come together and share. And I don't think a lot of other shows have that piece where you see different people with different perspectives, but we can come together. And even when we disagree, we can say, you know what, I didn't agree with you when you said this or that, but I can see your perspective and I can understand. And that is the way we try to model what educators and education and school districts and school communities can look like. lastly, I just want to say that kids out here need us more than ever. We have a country right now that is under attack for marginalized groups and communities. And as educators, we have to know the impact of the world or the country's views on our children. We have to understand that this year is going to be a very hard year for a lot of educators because as programs and funding has been cut, monies from COVID and ESSER funds and all of these things have been reduced and eliminated and spent. And it's going to be very hard for a lot of people to look at their budgets and say, we can keep doing what we were doing. So there was going to be a lot of job opportunities lost. There's going to be a lot of students who are going to be sacrificed. There's going to be a lot of programs that's going to be cut. There's going to be a lot of difficulties in front of us. However, we've survived so much through this country just living, and I want people to stay inspired. We've overcome so much that this is just another thing that we will overcome if we stick together, if we stay strong, if we understand that this too shall pass. But we have to endure. And in shows like yours, again, being able to get it out there and express these things. And so again, I say thank you. But as far as me, as far as I'm concerned, I have another book coming out. It's called My Voice is My Power. It's an animation book that should be out the end of this month, beginning of April. And it picks up talking about my speech impediment and how I didn't feel good, and how you mentioned in the beginning of this show of I got picked on and talked about and all of these things. And I met a wonderful speech therapist, and she taught me how to control my speech and my tongue and gave me exercises and tools, and she believed in me. And from there, my confidence built. Now, again, building community and building people and having people come to you. That was an opportunity for me to go one way or the other, because she could have been a mean teacher and I could have just turned off and never got the help that I needed. But she was a wonderful teacher. She was a wonderful person. And I learned and I embraced the information she gave me. And as a result, years later, many moons later, I became the student speaker for my graduating class when I received my doctorate. And I don't think I could have done that if that teacher did not give me the confidence that she did when she did. So you never know how you can influence a child's life, and you can be that spark that lights that fuse that blows them up so they can become incredible people. So just always remember that your words are impactful. Understand that your presence is meaningful and that there's nothing that you can do to shape what's outside of you, but you can control what you do between that space between you and the child. So always be mindful of that. But again, thank you so much.
My pleasure. That was Dr. Kofi Rogers, here to remind us to stay inspired and write our own narratives. We can learn more about Dr. Rogers on our show notes, so please check that information out. And this has been another episode with Dr. Joey Weisler on the Classroom Narratives podcast. Thank you for joining us on the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast. If today's episode inspired you or made you think differently, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or review wherever you listen to podcasts, and stay connected with us on the @Classroom Narratives podcast over Instagram and Facebook. Remember, together we can transform our scars into stars in education, one conversation at a time.